Welcome. Today, we're going to trace the dramatic and often really controversial history of clinical psychology. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. Clinical psychology feels so solid today, right? Like it's always been here. But the story of how it actually became a science is filled with some pretty surprising twists and turns. Believe me, it was not a straight line. It was more like a century-long process of discovery, intense debate, and sometimes just outright crisis. So to really get a grip on its history, you gotta understand that the whole field is built on these four key pillars: research, assessment, treatment, and prevention. But here's what's so fascinating. They didn't all show up at once, and definitely not for the reasons you might think. They were built piece by piece, often in reaction to massive world events. Our story really kicks off back in the late 1800s, and it all starts with one simple but pretty revolutionary idea from the field's founder, a guy named Lightner Whitmer. And here's the key thing. From the very beginning, clinical psychology was all about being practical. Whitmer's big argument was that all these insights we're getting from research, they have to be used to actually help people. He wanted to focus on understanding the causes, or what's known as the etiology of psychological problems. This was the spark that lit the whole fire. So this practical vision, it led directly to the first huge boom for the field. This big drive to try and measure the differences between people. And this whole quest to quantify the human mind was about to get a massive and totally unexpected push from what was happening in the world. What this timeline really shows you is this critical shift in focus. It started with researchers like Galton, who were just fascinated by human differences. Pure science, right? Then you get Alfred Binet in France, who creates a tool with a very specific, very helpful purpose in mind. That's right. His mission wasn't to rank people or label them. He was actually hired by the French government to create a tool for helping students, not just sorting them. His whole goal was to find the kids who were struggling so that they could get the extra support they needed to succeed. But then World War I happened, and all of a sudden, the US military had this enormous problem. They had to evaluate over 1 million draftees. They desperately needed to know who was mentally and intellectually fit for the battlefield. And individual tests like Binet's, they were just way too slow for a job this huge. This crisis literally forced the creation of the first ever group intelligence tests. You had the Army Alpha for recruits who could read, and the Army Beta for those who were illiterate or didn't speak English. And just like that, bam, psychologists were suddenly the experts in practical, large-scale human assessment. It changed the field forever. Okay, so let's fast forward to the 1950s. Psychology is feeling pretty confident. Psychotherapy, especially psychoanalysis, is the undisputed king. But the field was about to get rocked by two seismic challenges that questioned its very foundations. So in 1952, this psychologist, Hans Eysenck, publishes a single paper that causes an absolute uproar. He basically argued that there was little to no hard evidence that the field's main tool, psychotherapy, actually worked at all. Eysenck based this explosive claim on a really powerful idea that, well, a lot of people just get better on their own. It's a phenomenon called spontaneous remission. He was basically saying that time itself is a great healer, and any therapy out there had to prove it was better than just waiting. And this chart just illustrates his point perfectly. He gathered up data from existing studies, and what he found was, well, it was shocking. His data suggested that people who got no therapy actually recovered at a higher rate than those who went through psychoanalysis or other types of therapy. The implication was just staggering. So, while the field was still trying to recover from Eysenck's paper, another psychologist named Paul Meehl was getting ready to launch a second and equally devastating critique. But this time, the target wasn't therapy. It was the very act of psychological judgment itself. In his 1954 book, Meehl basically argued that data-driven statistical predictions were consistently more accurate than the subjective gut feelings of even the most experienced clinicians. He was essentially saying that a simple formula could outperform an expert's intuition. Now, these challenges were absolutely brutal. You might think this would have destroyed clinical psychology, but it didn't. In fact, it forced the field to rebuild itself on a much, much stronger foundation: hard evidence. It's kind of ironic, really. Instead of killing psychotherapy, Eysenck's bombshell paper actually saved it. It created this huge demand for proof, and that demand led to decades of really rigorous research that eventually figured out which treatments were most effective for specific conditions, like using behavior therapy for anxiety disorders. And on the assessment side, Meehl's challenge was met with these incredibly powerful new tools, like the MMPI. This was a total game changer. Instead of just relying on a clinician's intuition, the MMPI compared one person's answers to thousands of others, using pure statistics to find patterns of psychopathology. But it didn't stop there. By the 1960s, they realized that to really understand behavior, you had to get out of the clinic. They started actually observing people in their natural environments, at school, at home, you name it. This added a whole other layer of objective data to the process. So where has this long, difficult, and frankly fascinating journey taken us? Well, it's led to a field that is broader, more rigorous, and way more integrated into our lives than its founders could have ever imagined. I mean, just look at the kind of research happening today. It's so far beyond its original scope. Clinical psychologists are on the front lines of understanding the mind-body connection in illnesses like cancer, the brand's role in our behavior, and tackling huge societal issues like preventing violence and treating trauma. So when you look back at this whole history, the big takeaway is this. The field's greatest asset isn't that it has all the answers. No, its real strength is the fact that it's constantly challenging its own assumptions in the search for better ones. It grew stronger not by ignoring its critics, but by facing them head-on. And that really just leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What's next? What's going to be the next big challenge or controversy that forces the field of psychology to evolve all over again?